My husband, Richard, and I had a deal. 50 years of Midwestern winters, 50 years of sensible savings, all for one big payout. A little house in Florida with a screened-in lanai where we could drink our morning coffee and watch the pelicans. We'd even put a down payment on a place in a sleepy little community called Barefoot Bay. Then Richard passed, far too soon, and our daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Mark, stepped in to help me with the finances. A year later, the Florida house was gone, my entire nest egg vanished, and I was staring at my new home, a 1982 Starcraft travel trailer parked on a desolate patch of gravel in what they charitably called an RV resort. They told me the market had crashed, that it was a terrible investment, that they'd saved me from financial ruin. But last Tuesday, I saw a picture on my granddaughter's Instagram. It was a selfie of her, beaming, with a familiar-looking swimming pool and a pale yellow house in the background. The caption read, "First swim at the new vacation house." The geotag was Barefoot Bay, Florida, and the house, I'd know that ridiculous flamingo-shaped mailbox anywhere, was mine. Let me take you back a bit, so you understand how a woman who once balanced the books for a mid-sized accounting firm and never missed a car payment in her life ended up here, listening to a generator hum all night. It started with the grief. When Richard died, the world went gray. It was like someone had turned down the volume on my life. We had been a team, you know? He was the dreamer, the one who'd clip out articles from Modern Maturity about fishing tournaments and beachfront property. I was the planner, the one with the spreadsheets and the retirement accounts. Together, we had built a good, solid life in Ohio. Not flashy, but ours. 2 kids, a paid-for house, and that big, beautiful Florida dream shimmering on the horizon. When he was gone, that dream was the only thing that kept me going. It felt like my last promise to him. Our daughter, Sarah, was wonderful at first. She and Mark drove up from Cincinnati every weekend. They'd bring groceries, sit with me while I cried, and started gently talking about the future. Mark was a financial advisor, you see. Not with a big-name firm like Merrill Lynch or anything, but a smaller, local company. He was slick, I'll give him that. Always wore a perfectly pressed shirt even on a Saturday, and had a way of explaining things that made you feel like you were the smart one for understanding it. "Susan," he'd say, leaning forward on my floral sofa, his voice all sincerity and concern, "we're worried about you managing all this on your own. Richard's portfolio, the house sale, the Florida purchase, it's a lot to handle when you're grieving." Sarah would nod, her eyes full of what I thought was love and concern. "We just want to make it easier on you, Mom. Let Mark handle the paperwork. It's what he does. He can make sure you get the best possible return on Dad's life insurance." I resisted at first. Richard and I had always handled our own affairs. I knew our finances inside and out. But I was so tired. The thought of all those phone calls, the notarizing, the capital gains taxes, it was overwhelming. The grief was a physical weight pressing down on me. They wore me down with kindness. They framed it as them taking care of me, of honoring Richard's memory by making sure his queen, that's what he called me, was secure. So I did it. I signed the papers that gave Mark power of attorney over my finances. I remember the feel of the cheap ballpoint pen in my hand, scratching my name onto that document. It's a feeling that will haunt me for the rest of my days. The first step was selling our family home in Ohio. That was a pang, of course, but it was a necessary one. The house was too big for me, and the sale proceeds were the final piece of the Florida puzzle. Mark handled the whole thing. He found the realtor, staged the house, and negotiated the sale. He presented me with the final numbers, all neatly printed on his company's letterhead. It looked good. It looked right. The money, he explained, would go into a special high-yield trust account he'd set up for me. Completely safe, Susan, he assured me. This will protect it from market volatility while we close on the Barefoot Bay property. I remember nodding, feeling a wave of relief. This was why I'd agreed to it. This was him taking care of things. The next few months were a blur of paperwork. He'd bring over documents for me to sign, always explaining them in his smooth, reassuring way. There were delays with the Florida property, issues with the title, problems with the inspection. Just standard stuff, he'd say with a wave of his hand. Better we find this now. We want it to be perfect for you. I trusted him. He was my son-in-law, my daughter's husband, my granddaughter's father. Why would I not trust him?
Meanwhile, I'd moved into a small apartment he and Sarah had found for me. It was supposed to be temporary, just for a few months, until the Florida house was ready. He'd come by weekly with updates. The updates became more and more vague. We hit a little snag with the underwriters. The seller is being difficult about repairs. And then the tone started to shift. Susan, the market's taken a real downturn, he told me one afternoon, his face a mask of carefully curated concern. He had a binder full of charts and graphs that all seemed to point down. It's this new administration, the interest rates. It's a perfect storm. I'm honestly getting nervous about locking you into such a big investment right now. A property like that, at your age, it could become an albatross. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. He was slowly, methodically laying the groundwork for the kill. He wasn't just stealing money. He was stealing my future, my promise to my husband, my final chapter. And he was using my love for my own daughter as the weapon. I pushed back, of course. Mark, Richard and I planned for this. The money is set aside. It's not an investment to be flipped. It's my home. But what if you need that money for long-term care? He'd counter, his voice dripping with false reason. What if you have a medical emergency? This house would tie up all your liquidity. We could put the money into something much more sensible. A diversified portfolio of annuities. I've found some that are offering fantastic rates. Sarah, backed him up every step of the way. He's right, Mom. We're just thinking of your safety. What if you fell down there? Who would help you? Here, you're close to us. They worked on me for weeks. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. They made me feel old, fragile, and foolish. They made Richard and Mai's dream sound like a childish fantasy, irresponsible even. The Florida house wasn't a sensible plan for a widow. It was a reckless gamble. I started to doubt myself. Had Richard and I been naive? Was I being stubborn and silly? The final blow came about 6 months after I had sold my house. Mark sat me down at my little kitchen table, the one that looked out over the apartment complex parking lot, and told me the money was gone. Not all of it, of course, just most of it. A bad investment, he said, shaking his head and looking at the floor like a chastised schoolboy. He'd put my nest egg, the house money, Richard's life insurance, everything, into a groundbreaking tech startup. A sure thing, he'd been told. It had gone belly up overnight. I'm so sorry, Susan. I was trying to grow your money to give you even more security. I was too aggressive. I feel terrible. He showed me statements from a company I'd never heard of, showing a massive loss. It all looked so official. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I wasn't just sad, I was terrified. Over $500,000 evaporated. Sarah wept, clinging to his arm. "Oh, honey, you were just trying to help," she'd sobbed. It was a brilliant performance. They played their parts perfectly. The remorseful, overeager professional and the supportive, loving wife. And me? I was the foolish old woman, the victim of a volatile market and a son-in-law who just tried too hard. There wasn't enough left for a condo, let alone a house. My dreams of a lanaya and pelicans were replaced by the cold, hard reality of Social Security and a dwindling savings account. That's when Mark, my savior, came up with his final, perfect solution. He'd found a used travel trailer, a real bargain, and he knew of a permanent RV park not too far from them, a place with a real sense of community. It was the only way I could live independently, he said. They would help me buy it, help me get set up. It was the least they could do. It was their way of making it right. I felt so ashamed, so defeated, that I just agreed. I packed up my few belongings, the memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, and I moved into a 300-square-foot tin box on a gravel lot. My neighbors were a mix of transient construction workers and others who, like me, had found themselves on the wrong side of luck. I spent the next year in a fog of humiliation and loss. I believed him. I believed them both. I grieved for my husband, for my home, and for the dream that had been so cruelly snatched away. And I would have gone on believing him, living out my days in this trailer park, if not for that one stupidly careless Instagram post. The moment I saw my granddaughter's smiling face reflected in the water of my pool, standing in the backyard of my house, the fog didn't just lift, it burned away in a fire of pure, unadulterated rage. And in that fire, a new plan was forged. A spreadsheet started forming in my mind. The old Susan, the one who balanced the books and read the fine print, was back.
He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. Mark had made 2 critical mistakes. First, he had underestimated me. He saw a grieving old woman, easy to manipulate and confuse with fancy charts. He didn't see the woman who had put her husband through college by managing the books of a construction company, who had caught a payroll manager embezzling funds in her 30s, and who could spot a padded expense report from a mile away. His second mistake? He got sloppy. He assumed his con was over and he'd gotten away with it. That picture wasn't just a picture. It was the loose thread. And I, my friends, was about to pull on it until his entire fraudulent life unraveled. The first thing I did was take a screenshot of that Instagram post. Then I saved the picture, zooming in on my granddaughter's happy face, on the sparkling water of my pool, on the stucco walls of my house. I saved it to my phone, emailed it to a new address I created just for this purpose, and then I forced myself to put the phone down. Rage is a powerful fuel, but it burns hot and fast. If you act on pure emotion, you make mistakes. I needed cold, hard, methodical anger, the kind that builds a case file, the kind that lasts. My days in the StarCraft had fallen into a dreary routine. Coffee and my chipped world's best grandma mug, a walk around the gravel loop of the park, avoiding eye contact with the man who always seemed to be polishing his pickup truck without a shirt on, and then hours of daytime television. That routine was over. The next morning, I was at the public library when it opened. The trailer park's Wi-Fi was spotty at best, and the last thing I wanted was for Mark to somehow track my online activity. Paranoia? Maybe, but when your own family cons you out of your life savings, you earn the right to be a little paranoid. I sat down at a sticky computer terminal in the corner of the library, the kind with a chunky monitor that hummed and took 5 minutes to boot up. It smelled of old paper and dust, and it was perfect. Anonymous. I started with the obvious, the property appraiser's website for Brevard County, Florida. It's public record, anyone can look it up. I knew the address by heart. It was burned into my memory from the Zillow listing Richard and I had drooled over 100 times. I typed it in, my fingers fumbling on the stiff keyboard. My heart was thudding against my ribs. And there it was. Lot number, parcel ID, square footage, and under owner name, Barefoot Dreams LLC. Not Mark, not Sarah, an LLC, a limited liability company. I almost laughed.
Of course! It was so insultingly typical of a small-time financial schemer. An LLC is a way to create distance, to make ownership less transparent. But for a man as arrogant as Mark, it was also a taunt. Barefoot dreams. He was mocking me. He was mocking Richard. The sale date was listed as April 14th of the previous year, exactly 2 weeks after he'd told me the money had been lost in that tech investment. And the sale price? $485,000. That number was sickeningly familiar. It was almost the exact amount deposited into my account from the sale of my Ohio home. An LLC wasn't a dead end. It was just another door to open. Every state requires an LLC to be registered, and that information is also public. I went to the Florida Division of Corporations website. I typed in Barefoot Dreams LLC into the search bar. The result popped up instantly, and there, listed under registered agent, was a name I didn't recognize, a lawyer in Melbourne, Florida, but it also listed the authorized member. And that name sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Mark R. Johnson, my son-in-law, my daughter's husband. He hadn't even bothered to hide it that well. He probably thought his grieving, technologically illiterate mother-in-law would never even know how to look. The address listed for him was his office, the same office where he'd printed out the fake statements about my losses. And as I stared at the screen in that quiet library, the hum of the old computer, my only companion, I realized the hole was so much deeper than I had imagined. He'd built a fortress of lies with my money, but he forgot one thing. I know how to read a blueprint. Stick with me because we're about to start knocking down some walls. I printed everything, the property assessment, the sales history, the LLC registration page. I paid the librarian $1.20 in nickels and dimes from my purse. This was my first folder in my case file. The folder was simply labeled theft. This was my proof of the where. Now I needed proof of the how. I needed to trace the path of my money. This part was trickier. He still had power of attorney. I couldn't just call the bank and ask for information without risking him being notified. I had to be smart. I had to be the fragile old lady he thought I was. I went home and called my bank's main customer service line. When a nice young woman answered, I put a little tremor in my voice. "Hello, dear. I hope you can help me. I'm in a bit of a pickle." I explained, with practiced helplessness, that I was applying for a local senior program to help me with my electric bills, and they needed proof of my assets from the previous year. I told my son-in-law, my financial advisor, usually handled all my paperwork, but he was on a big trip, and I couldn't possibly bother him. "You know how busy they get," I added, with a little sigh.
"Oh, that's just the problem, dear," I said quickly. "I had to move, you see. Things have been a bit tight. I'm staying with a friend and just have a P.O. box for my mail now. It's a bit embarrassing, to be honest." I'd gone to the post office that afternoon and rented the smallest box they had. It was the best $10 I'd spent all year. I gave her the new P.O. box number, and she promised the statements for the entire previous year would be in the mail the next day. I hung up the phone, my hand steady as a rock. The frail, confused act had worked. 3 days later, I drove to the post office, my stomach in knots. I unlocked the little metal door, and there it was, a thick manila envelope from my bank. I didn't open it there. I drove to a little park by a duck pond, a place Richard and I used to go, and I parked the car. With shaking hands, I tore open the envelope. I laid the statements out on the passenger seat, 12 months of my financial life. It took me less than 10 minutes to find it. There was the huge deposit, the wire transfer from the sale of my Ohio home. And there, just over a year ago, was the withdrawal, a wire transfer for $485,000. It wasn't made out to some tech startup called Alpha Core Innovations, like his phony documents had shown. It was made out to the Coastal Bend Title Company in Melbourne, Florida. And in the memo line, a single damning line of text for the purchase of my Florida address by Barefoot Dreams, LLC. There it was. Not a suspicion, not a theory, a fact.
cold, hard, and printed in black and white on official bank stationery. He hadn't lost my money. He had wired it directly from my account to buy my house for himself. I folded the statement, placed it gently back in the envelope, and I cried. But I wasn't crying from sadness this time. I was crying with rage and with a terrible crystalline clarity. The betrayal was so complete, so breathtaking in its cruelty. It was almost a work of art. But I wasn't done. The stack of papers held more secrets. I looked through the debit card charges on the joint account I still held with my daughter Sarah, the one she'd insisted on for emergencies. We'd always had a joint account, ever since she went to college. It made me feel close to her. Now I saw it for what it was. Another access point. I saw a charge from a high-end patio furniture store in Florida for over $5,000. I saw repeated charges from a pool supply company. A charge from a landscaping service called Palm Paradise. It was all there. My daughter wasn't just complicit. She was an active participant. She was sleeping in my bed, swimming in my pool, and planting hibiscus bushes with my stolen money. That thought hurt more than the money itself. Mark was a predator who had found an easy mark. Sarah was my own flesh and blood, and she had traded her mother for a vacation house. My path forward became very clear. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. That was plan A. Plan B was making sure that they understood on a cellular level what they had done. It was about justice, my brand of justice. I started my car and drove back to my trailer, the case file heavy on the seat next to me. I had the where and the how. Now it was time to plan the when. The next phase of my plan required me to be an actress. It was the hardest role I've ever played because it meant smiling in the face of the people I despise most in the world. It meant that playing the part of the dotty, defeated mother they had created. I called Sarah. Honey, I haven't heard from you in a few days. Just wanted to make sure everything was okay. She gushed, the practiced sympathy flowing like syrup. Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. Things have just been crazy. The kids, work, you know how it is. We were just saying we need to have you over for dinner. I'd like that. But I was wondering, Mark has that big conference coming up in Orlando next month, the Financial Planner Summit, doesn't he? I knew he did. I'd seen him preening about being a keynote speaker on his LinkedIn profile, another public resource he assumed I knew nothing about. He does, she said, a little surprised. It's the big one. How did you remember that? Oh, I try to keep track, I said vaguely. Well, I was thinking, it's supposed to be lovely and warm down there in March. I know it's a long shot, but maybe I could just see it, Florida, since, I let my voice trail off into a sniffle. It's silly, but just to feel the sun. I could stay in a cheap motel near his conference. I wouldn't be a bother, I promise. Just for a day or two to say I finally made it there. I heard her put her hand over the phone, the muffled sound of her talking to Mark. He probably saw no harm. In fact, it was probably perfect for them. A little trip for the poor old mom they were caring for. It would look good to any outside observers. She came back on the line, her voice overflowing with magnanimous warmth. Mom, that's a wonderful idea, but you're not staying in some motel. Mark's company is putting him up in a suite. There's a pull-out sofa. You can stay with him. And then we can all drive down to the house for the weekend after the conference is over. The house. My house. She said it so casually, as if I knew no idea. A wave of ice and fire went through my veins. It was exactly what I had hoped for. Oh, sweetie, are you sure? Your house? I asked, playing the part of someone flustered and overwhelmed by their generosity.
Of course, Mom. We want you to see it. It's a wonderful place. We want to share it with you. The lies. The breathtaking, stunning lies. I felt a grim smile touch my lips. Oh, honey, I whispered into the phone. That would mean the world to me. The 3 weeks leading up to the Florida trip were the busiest of my life. I had my folder of evidence, the LLC registration, the bank statements, the property records. But it wasn't enough. An accusation from an old lady with a folder of printouts against a respected financial advisor son-in-law? I needed something more. I needed irrefutable, undeniable proof from an outside source. I needed a professional. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. I'm not a wealthy woman anymore, but I wasn't destitute. Richard had left a small, separate life insurance policy with me as the direct beneficiary, one that Mark had somehow missed, likely because it was from an old job and paid out directly without going through probate. It was my rainy day fund. Well, it was a hurricane. I took a bus to Cleveland and walked into the office of a man named Frank Gillespie. Frank was a forensic accountant. A friend from my old accounting firm had given me his name with a note that said, "This is the guy you call when you want to find out where the bodies are buried, financially speaking." Frank was a small, neat man in his late 60s with a gray mustache and eyes that didn't miss a thing. He looked less like a detective and more like a high school biology teacher. I sat across the polished desk from him in his quiet, orderly office, and I told him the whole story, from start to finish. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I laid it out, piece by piece, just as I had laid out the bank statements on the seat of my car. When I was finished, I pushed my folder of documents across the desk to him. He was silent for a long time, looking through each page with meticulous care. He'd occasionally purse his lips or let out a low whistle. When he was done, he stuck the papers neatly and looked at me over his glasses. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "what he's done isn't just unethical, it's criminal. Breach of fiduciary duty, wire fraud, fraud against the elderly. A district attorney would have a field day with this." "I know," I said, "but I don't want to go to the DA. Not yet. A criminal case could take years. He'd lawyer up, drain what's left, and drag my daughter through the mud. By the time it was over..." Frank nodded, understanding perfectly. "By the time it was over, there'd be nothing left to recover. You want the money back, and you want him to know that you're the one who beat him." "Exactly," I said. A wave of relief washed over me. He got it. "This will cost you," he warned. "My services aren't cheap." "I have $10,000, I said. "It's almost all I have left. Use it to give me the ammunition I need." Frank took on my case. He told me it was one of the more brazen examples of elder financial abuse he'd ever seen. He got me to sign a new power of attorney, this one giving him limited authority to act on my behalf, which legally superseded the one I had given Mark. This was a critical step. Then, Frank filed the document with the court, which put it on public record, a time bomb waiting to go off if Mark or his lawyers ever got curious. For a fee, he requested full discovery from the banks, the title company, and he even hired a local guy in Florida to find out who was paying the utilities and property taxes on my house. Within 2 weeks, my little folder had grown into a thick 3-ring binder. Frank found everything. The bank transfers were confirmed. The title company records showed Mark signing the closing documents as the sole member of Barefoot Dreams LLC. The utility bills for my house, water, electric, cable, were all being paid from a bank account in Mark's name, an account I never knew existed. Frank also found the account where Mark had stashed the rest of the money. See, the house was $485,000, but the total for my Ohio home sale and Richard's main insurance policy had been closer to $650,000. Where was the other $165,000? Frank found it sitting in a brokerage account under the LLC's name, an account Mark had been using as his own personal piggy bank, day trading stocks and buying and selling options with what was left of my retirement savings. Frank's report was a symphony of malfeasance, a detailed, documented, ironclad account of the theft. He overnighted a full copy of the binder to me at my P.O. box, along with a certified letter he had drafted. That letter was my silver bullet.
When I stepped off the plane in Orlando, the warm, humid air felt like a promise. Mark was there to pick me up, all smiles and charm. "Susan, you made it! How was the flight?" He hugged me, and it took every ounce of my willpower not to recoil. I just smiled weakly and told him I was a little tired. We drove to his conference hotel, a massive glass and steel monstrosity with a palm tree-lined driveway. As a valet took his car, I looked at him. Really looked at him. The expensive suit, the Italian leather shoes, the gold watch. It was all but with my money. He was wearing my life. I spent the next 2 days playing my role to perfection. I sat by the resort pool reading a paperback. I ate the complimentary breakfast in the morning and told him how wonderful it was. When he would come back from the conference sessions, full of his own self-importance, I would ask him gentle, unassuming questions about his day. "It sounds so complicated," I'd say. "I'm so glad Sarah has you to handle all our family's finances." He'd puff out his chest and patronize me, explaining concepts he thought were far beyond my grasp. I just nodded and smiled and filed it all away. I was the gray ghost in the corner of his triumphant week, a living symbol of his victory. And he had no idea he was celebrating on top of a landmine. The conference ended on a Friday. He gave his big keynote speech that morning. I even went to it, sitting in the back of the enormous ballroom. I watched him pace the stage, a picture of confidence, talking about building generational wealth and the sanctity of the client trust. The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost breathtaking. After the speech, we packed up and Sarah drove up from Barefoot Bay to meet us. My daughter. Seeing her was a fresh stab of pain. She hugged me tight and told me how wonderful I looked. She seemed so happy, so carefree. And why wouldn't she be? She was on a permanent vacation funded by my ruin. We all got into her luxury SUV, also purchased with my money, I had no doubt, for the 90-minute drive to my house. The trap was set. Now I just had to spring it. That drive to Barefoot Bay was the quiet before the storm. Sarah chattered on about the kids, about a new restaurant she and Mark had tried, about the fantastic weather. Mark, basking in the afterglow of his keynote address, played the part of the magnanimous host, pointing out landmarks and telling me how much I was going to just love the peace and quiet. I sat in the back, looking out the window, a 3-ring binder in my tote bag. It felt as heavy as a gravestone. Each mile we drove, my heart beat a little harder, a little steadier. This wasn't nerves, it was resolve. When we pulled into the driveway, it hit me harder than I expected. There it was, my house. Richard's house. The pale yellow stucco, the white trim, the palm trees Richard had always dreamed of planting. And there, by the curb, was the flamingo mailbox. It was a silly, whimsical thing we had picked out together from a catalog, laughing about how perfectly Florida it was. Seeing it now, knowing they had kept it, felt like the ultimate insult. They hadn't just stolen the house, they had stolen the memories and dressed themselves in them. They gave me the grand tour. "And this is the master bedroom," Sarah said, flinging open the double doors. My bedroom. They had a king-sized sleigh bed, ornate and dark, that looked completely out of place with the light, airy feel of the room. "We thought you'd be more comfortable in the guest room, Mom. It has its own bathroom, and it's right off the kitchen." Of course it was. I was the help, the poor relation, visiting the manor. I walked out to the lanaya. The pool was sparkling, just like in the Instagram picture. There was the expensive patio furniture I'd seen on the debit card charges. Beyond the pool screen was a small canal, and I saw a flash of silver as a fish jumped. A real, live pelican was perched on a nearby dock post, looking haughty and magnificent.
This was the exact scene Richard and I had described to each other 1,000 times over chili on a cold Ohio night. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and unwelcome. Mark, ever the schmuck, misinterpreted it. He came up behind me and put a hand on my shoulder and said, "It's something, isn't it? Sometimes you just have to take a leap of faith." The market came back strong. We got lucky. The audacity. It was time. We ate a quiet dinner that night. I barely touched my food. They attributed to travel fatigue. I went to my room early, telling them I needed to rest. But I didn't rest. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed and took out the binder Frank had sent me, and I reviewed my plan one last time. Frank and I had gone over it on the phone a dozen times. First rule, no yelling. The second rule, stay in control. This was not a confrontation. This was a business transaction, a transfer of assets. The next morning was Saturday. Mark and Sarah were sleeping in. I was up at sunrise. I made a pot of coffee and took a cup out to the lanaya, setting it on the glass top table. I laid out 3 things next to my cup. The first was a single sheet of paper, a color printout of the LLC registration showing Mark as the authorized member. The second was another sheet, the bank statement showing the $485,000 wire transfer from my account to the title company. The final item was a thick, pristine, white envelope. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. Every piece was perfectly in place. All I had to do was wait for the players to walk onto the stage.
Around 8:30, Mark came shambling out to the kitchen, scratching his stomach. He was wearing silk pajama pants and a t-shirt. "Morning, Susan," he said, yawning. "Coffee smells good." He poured himself a mug and then walked out onto the lanai to join me. He saw the papers on the table, but didn't register them at first. "Morning, Mark," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby. This place, I'm telling you, it just melts the stress away." He took a sip of his coffee. He still hadn't really looked down. "That's funny," I said, taking a calm sip of my own coffee. "I haven't had a good night's sleep in over a year, ever since you told me my retirement money was gone. Funny how that works." The change was instantaneous. His relaxed posture vanished. His eyes flicked down to the papers on the table. He saw his name on the LLC registration. He saw the wire transfer. I watched the color drain from his face. It was immensely satisfying. "What is this?" he said, his voice a low growl. But he knew. Oh, he knew exactly what it was. "That," I said, pointing with one steady finger, "is the public record of the company you set up, Barefoot Dreams, LLC. And that is a copy of my bank statement showing my money being wired to purchase this house in that company's name. A house you told me I couldn't afford after you told me you'd lost everything in a bad investment. That's called fraud, Mark." He was sputtering. "Now, Susan, you're confused. This is a complicated financial arrangement. I was protecting your assets." I held up a hand. "Stop. Do not insult my intelligence again. Frank Gillespie sends his regards, by the way. He's my forensic accountant. He found everything. The brokerage account with the remaining $165,000 you've been playing with, the utility bills in your name, everything." Just then, Sarah came out, drawn by the change in tone. She was in a robe, her hair messy. "What's going on?" she asked, a confused little girl. She looked at her husband's terrified face, then at my cold one, and then at the papers on the table. I watched her mind connect the dots. I saw the moment she realized the game was up. She didn't look angry. She just looked caught. I slid the thick white envelope across the table toward Mark. You have 2 options, Mark. Inside that envelope is a certified letter from my attorney, my real one, not a stooge who registers shell companies. It outlines everything you have done with copies of all the documentation. He stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Option 1, I said, continuing, my voice as calm as the morning air, is that I take that letter and a copy of Frank's entire file and I walk it over to the Brevard County Sheriff's Office this morning. Then I go to the district attorney. Then I go to the SEC. You, a keynote speaker on financial ethics, will be the subject of a massive criminal investigation for elder financial abuse and wire fraud. You will lose your license. You will likely go to prison. Sarah may even be charged as an accessory. You will lose everything. The house will be seized as an asset in the investigation, and after years of legal battles, I might get some of it back. I paused to let that sink in. I looked at Sarah, whose face had crumpled into tears. I looked at Mark, whose face was a mask of gray stone. Or, I said, leaning forward, there's option 2. Also in that envelope is a quitclaim deed. It transfers the ownership of this house, the LLC, and all its assets from Barefoot Dreams, LLC, directly to me, Susan Miller. There's also a cashier's check made out to me for $165,000, which I will expect you to procure by Monday morning from the brokerage account. You will sign the deed. Sarah, as your wife in the state of Florida, will also sign. You will pack a bag with your clothes. You will get in your car, and you will leave. You will walk away from my house, my money, and you will never, ever speak to me again, except through a lawyer. If you do this, I will consider the matter settled. He stared at me dumbfounded. The bully on the playground had just been punched in the nose, and he didn't know how to react. You can't just... I can, and I will, I said. Checkmate, Mark. I believe those are your silk pajamas. They should probably be the first things you pack. The silence on the lanai was broken only by the sound of Sarah's soft sobbing and the distant cry of a seagull. The choice was his: prison and public humiliation, or simple, quiet annihilation. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For the first time in over a year, I felt the Florida sun on my skin, and it was warm. I had my dream back. It was smaller now and lonelier without Richard, but it was mine, all mine. I picked up my coffee, my hand no longer shaking, and I took a long, slow sip. It was the best cup of coffee I had ever tasted.
So, another story of my grandmother has ended, and be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.